Good evening, and welcome to our Minnesota District 66 Legislative Candidate Forum. My name is Florence Sprague, and I am a league-trained moderator and member. I'm a member of the Roseville League of Women Voters of the Roseville area, though I live in Maplewood. That's one of the first-ring suburbs in that league. So love them or hate them, I don't get to vote for any of these candidates that are here tonight. Today's forum is sponsored by the Leagues of Women Voters of St. Paul and Roseville area and the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, our host tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. It does not ever endorse candidates, though we study issues. We believe the success of our state depends on the values, knowledge, and commitment of our elected officials. Thus, it is essential for the public to better understand the views, opinions, and commitments of people running for elected office in Minnesota. It is this understanding that better equips voters with information to make informed voting decisions. We appreciate the candidates and audience members taking the time to be here tonight and to listen from home. Recordings of this event, which will be replayed by the cable channel and be on their YouTube station and Facebook, but recordings, whether they be in person or from a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. The candidates participating in today's forum have all agreed to all the forum rules, which were included in their invitation to participate. And I'm looking around the room, and I know we will have a civil conversation and with no personal attacks. Each candidate will be able to give a 2-minute introductory statement. They will have 1 minute to answer each question and 30 seconds for rebuttal if necessary due to personal commentary. A timer will then signal when they have a 30-second time amount left, and then again when their time is up if they are not finished. Closings will be done in reverse order of openings and will be 1 minute apiece so that we can squeak another question in, I hope. The forum, as I said, is being video recorded by the St. Paul Neighborhood Network for viewing by the public. And so check your schedules to find out when it will be rebroadcast on many different platforms. Okay. With that, we'll start with I will introduce the candidates, and then we will have opening statements. So, beginning I was going to say to my right and left, but they're not beside me this year. Okay, with the candidates for Senate District 66, we have John Marty and Greg Copeland. And then, now I've got to get the right district here. Okay, as we move around, we have House District 66B, Athena Hollins, and, oops, I'm out of order of the table, and Mikki Murray. I'm going to throw the cameraman off. Okay, then, as we move down the table, we have House District 66A, Brett Rose, and Alice Hausman. The candidates drew numbers for the order of the opening statements, and Brett Rose got number 1. So, Brett Rose, you're up.
Well, my name is Brett Rose. I'm running to be the district representative for 66A. I'm not a politician. I'm just tired of the way that our politicians have taken our state so far. If you've been in office more than 10 years, you're not going to have any new ideas. And it's more than evident now that people want change. We have systemic racism we're still fighting against. Our taxes are higher than ever, and people want change. And that's what I'm here to help with. We need to get the people in the office that need to be there and get the people out that we don't need in there anymore.
Thank you. The next opening statement will be from Athena Hollins.
Thank you so much. Well, first, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event and giving us the opportunity to have this civil discussion. My name is Athena Hollins, and I'm running for House District 66B in St. Paul. I am the DFL endorsed candidate. I am a graduate of the University of St. Thomas School of Law. I married my law school sweetheart, and we live on the east side of St. Paul with 2 young children. I am running in this race because I believe that St. Paul needs a progressive, passionate problem solver at the Capitol. We are living in unprecedented times. With a global pandemic, the continued disenfranchisement of communities of color, and a president who is not interested in doing the work that needs to be done means that we need real leaders at the Capitol. And that is what I intend to bring. I am a proven coalition builder in my work. I do equity and inclusion work for the Bar Association, and I make a more inclusive legal profession for the entire state of Minnesota. In my campaign, I've brought together educators, I've brought together unions, I've brought together a number of individuals from community-based organizations because they know that we need real change at the Capitol and we need progressive voices at the Capitol. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I look forward to answering any questions that you have. If folks have more questions for me that are not part of this forum, feel free to reach out to me. My website is www.athenahollins.com.
Thank you. Senate candidate Greg Copeland, drew number 3.
I hope everybody likes my twins mask. It's a homemade job. You know, folks, we've got problems in River City. Y'all remember the Music Man? And he came to town and he peddled a lot of stuff and told you he was going to do all these wonderful things. Of course, they never tell you they're going to do it with your money. Well, you know, folks, I had the privilege of actually working in the city that our moderator lives in Maplewood, as the city manager. And when I got there, I was able to cut the existing budget by 3.5%. I was able to reduce taxes ultimately the second year, and the first year we froze the new taxes for the city. And yet we were able to hire 5 new, dare I say, policemen. Yes, we need police, and we support the police. And I was very proud of that, and we did it without a levy increase. Those of you who live in St. Paul, you know the dysfunction that we're facing in the mayor's office. I'm not running for mayor, I'm running for the legislature. Why? Because we've got a legislature that's absent the experience of somebody who knows how to run a city. And that's where our problems are in Minnesota right now. We have people that don't understand that you need field supervisors over your police. That's why George Floyd died. Is because there wasn't anybody in authority to tell the officer that had his foot on the neck to stop it. And that's what we need to change. We need to have accountability where it counts, out in the field, folks. We need to have people that are willing to take responsibility for the decisions they make. You know, I've been a newspaper reporter. I've been a community action director. I've dealt with the public's money. I've dealt with the public's truth. And that's what we need right now, is more truth and less stories and more experience for people who know what they're doing.
Thank you. Mikki Murray, drew number 4.
Good evening, and I also thank the League of Women Voters and SPNN for the opportunity to come before you tonight. My name is Mikki Murray, and I am the Republican-endorsed candidate for our House District 66B. I grew up in the western suburbs, but have called the North End neighborhood home for about 6 years. I moved into St. Paul in order to be closer to my church, which is actually on the west side. And living in St. Paul has actually been very interesting. I grew up in the suburbs, like I said, but living in the city is actually a real treat. I appreciate significantly the diversity of the neighborhoods, the diversity of peoples and communities, and this is a great place to raise a family and to grow up. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that are hindrances to that very experience, and so my issues center around financial security, which starts with education and goes all the way up through job skills, post-secondary ed, and small business support, because of course we need jobs for financial security. Housing security, we have a lot of issues around not just affordable housing, but when you are in a community of 50% renters, that poses a problem for wealth going forward. And our corporate landlords are posing a problem and a hindrance to that for families and individuals within the city. Safety in our homes and neighborhoods is absolutely required. I very strongly support our police and our first responders and believe that they need these tools necessary to actually carry out their jobs. We're in a tough time, and in times like these, actually hope does spring. And so while we work together, it absolutely must be together. Great things can come from it. So I look forward to answering your questions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 5 will be John Marty.
Thank you. And I too want to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring these forums. I think we have very few ways to get out the word these days about what the voters have to choose. And I think it's very important we do that. I've been a member of the Senate for many years now. I represent Roseville and 2 other suburbs, plus a big chunk of the city of St. Paul. And I'm running for re-election because I believe the same thing I believed when I first ran, and that is that we can do a better job as a society. We can tackle our problems. We can make life better for people. And that we as a people in a democracy, government is the way we relate to each other, the way we work together. And in all the problems we see, the most recent crises, the COVID crisis and the George Floyd killing, neither of those were the start of the problems we have, our housing problems, our healthcare problems, our economic disparities. They did, however, aggravate them and make them far worse. And I believe we can tackle them. I think that we should not be the only major industrialized country on the planet that doesn't have health care for everyone. Yet we spend twice as much as other countries spend on health care per person, twice as much, worse outcomes, and we don't cover everyone. I believe we can tackle our economic disparities. When 3 people in this country have as much wealth as the bottom 50%, bottom 150 million people have, there's something wrong with our economic system. Our tax code is unfair. Our system is unfair. I believe we can tackle these problems. I'm frustrated at the timidity of people in the legislature many times. I believe we can do more, and I look forward to the chance to continue to do so. And for more information about my campaign, I encourage you to go to my website, johnmarty.org.
Thank you. Thank you, John. The final opening statement is from Alice Hausman.
Thank you. And to the residents of District 66, I so wish we could be in the same room together. I look forward to that opportunity again in the future, but for now, this will have to do. I serve in the Minnesota House and on a number of committees, the Legacy Committee, Ways and Means Committee, Transportation, and I chair Housing, Finance, and Policy. I've spent most of my time on transportation and housing just because of the nature of the committees. A huge amount of time trying to build a more robust public transit system and intercity passenger rail and other transportation alternatives for those who require it, who either by choice because they would prefer not to have a car or because of age or youth are looking for other ways to get around. And then housing, of course, where I spend a huge amount of my time. And here, this year, I am just aware of how much more significant that challenge is for so many who don't make enough money to pay for housing. Many of them were at the lower income levels and were the first to lose their jobs at the start of the pandemic. And so that income inequality has huge outcomes for them, for individuals and families. One of those is food insecurity. That affects the health of the family. It affects a child's ability to learn. And the other one is housing instability, and that too affects the health of the family and a child's ability to learn. The University of Minnesota did research. By the time a child reaches 5th grade, if they've been homeless or highly mobile, they're achieving at the level of a 2nd grader who has been in stable housing. So all of those challenges in the life of an individual or family, they are all interconnected, and that's why the solutions are so complicated. Nothing is terribly easy or simple to accomplish, and that's why we are required to work together to get things done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Now we'll go to the question and answer portion, and the first question will begin with John Marty and go to the candidate's right. Since school just opened, I'm sort of thinking a lot about doing things online and thinking of all the children who are doing their schooling remotely and online. And considering the shift for businesses as well as education, what do you feel is the role of the state in ensuring optimal internet access and equity for all citizens?
I believe in our modern economy that the internet is a public utility. It's a public need that we all have. It worked okay the way we did, where people bought it as they needed it and so on, but when we have every student needing it and every business needing it, one of the smartest things we can do that wouldn't affect as many people in the metro area as in greater Minnesota, but is statewide broadband access for everyone. I think that's essential. I think the state ought to be doing it. It's not our constituents are the first winners from that, but I think it's essential we do it. And I also think we have to make sure that it's affordable to everyone, which is why, as a public utility, we ought to look at that. But school kids in St. Paul and so on, it may not be that they don't have access to it because of technology, but they don't have access to it because of cost and other things. I think the state has a huge obligation to do that, because we do have an obligation to provide a quality education for all students.
Thank you. And now to Greg Copeland.
Yeah, I think that frankly the marketplace is providing plenty of opportunities, certainly in the metro, for low income or families that are challenged because of being out of work right now. With the Comcast program, I think it's $9.95 a month. Certainly the school districts should help those who can't afford even that, because there really aren't a lot of other options except at the marketplace through various charter schools, which President, in his mind, Mr. Biden, would like to eliminate. Frankly, are providing that option to their customers. These are public schools, and they are supported with public dollars, and they've solved the problem, and there's plenty of opportunity for that. I think the problem at St. Paul is the school system that we have that isn't working for kids, regardless of whether they have internet.
Thank you. And now to, let's see, Mikki Murray.
Broadband access is absolutely critical across the state of Minnesota. We have, interestingly enough, the same results happening in rural areas that we do in the urban core, which is people who can't get internet. Now, the reasons for it vary. In the rural areas, it's because it isn't there, and the cost to actually get it installed is quite high and prohibitive from a market standpoint. Within the city, the issue is it costs too much, and opportunities are not consistent for people to make up that difference. We've seen quite a great expanse of telehealth during this pandemic. Unfortunately, it's still been limited based on those two things for rural and urban core. The state really does. We need to provide incentives, better incentives, and be more engaging to allow the infrastructure and incent the infrastructure being built.
Thank you. Now, Athena Hollins.
Thank you for this question. I absolutely believe that broadband access needs to be a public utility. And I can give you a couple of reasons why, echoing the comments of some of the folks here. The first one is I grew up in a rural area, and I know how long it took my parents to get broadband access. They just got it about 2 years ago. And that's really not acceptable when we're thinking about children, and especially in the times that we're in with children learning from home. The second thing is, I think that there is great evidence that the market has not served us in this capacity. I know I personally have run into issues working with several of the different internet companies in providing broadband access into my home in St. Paul, where I am very privileged and can afford any level of broadband that I need. So when I hear teachers talking about creating hotspots for students to share at St. Paul Public Schools, that is not an acceptable reality for any of us, and especially in a first world country. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing on the internet question, we'll go to Brett Rose.
No, I disagree with some of these people. I don't believe that we need to have it as a public utility. I can remember the day back when you used to get AOL on a disc and you had to go home and download it. Now what we need more internet for people. But by doing that, we need to do incentives for the companies to get into the rural areas, to make it easier, to make it cheaper, and to make it better.
Thank you. And finally, Alice Hausman.
Thank you. And I think you specifically wanted us to be clear about the state's role. The state is a necessary partner with school districts. This is a shared task we have to assure equal opportunity, to assure equity in the availability of technology. And certainly with broadband, we have the broader challenge across the state. DEED has just announced they're starting a fairly aggressive grant program specifically for broadband, and they're having communities apply to them for this, for the grants. I think the grants are something like $1,500 to get them started. On the issue of broadband, here's where the divided legislature comes in. We sometimes have a little tug of war between Greater Minnesota and Metro, or some regional or ideological issues, and that has, I think, slowed down the progress a little bit on the issue of broadband. But we obviously cannot give up equal opportunity, equity in technology.
Thank you. For the next question, responses will begin with Mikki Murray, and again, we'll go to the candidate's right. Okay. There we go. The pandemic has really affected small businesses in Minnesota. What legislative measures would you support to support the future of small businesses in Minnesota?
Thank you for that question. Multiple things are actually needed to not only support small business, but to encourage entrepreneurs to begin whatever it is their passion, wherever their passion takes them. Dealing with the outcome of the pandemic is actually going to require a lot more creativity than we've had. Allowing people to hold on. Right now, people are just holding on, and they're not holding on very well. So we have a lot of small businesses who are being closed without the opportunity to come back. We do need to support those people. Now we've had federal subsidies and assistance in doing some of that, but from a state standpoint, we really need to look at bringing down some of the barriers to starting small business and making sure that the steps that we take encourage them to remain strong once they do get started, but that they're able to find the resources that they need and the help that they desire.
Thank you. Now to Athena Hollins.
My number one response on this is we absolutely have to get the bonding bill passed at the state legislature. And it's been held up for several months due to some political games. But that bonding bill provides infrastructure and good paying jobs across the state of Minnesota, many of which are held by small business owners. So that would be my number one legislative priority. But following that, we have to look at this as a systemic issue. While the jobs are important and small businesses are important, we know that people are taking money away from investing in their small business and taking their money away from being entrepreneurs just to survive. So when we provide things like mortgage assistance, rent assistance, any sort of subsidies that are allowing folks to continue to live a normal lifestyle, that means that they can invest the money that they have into that business, make sure it stays afloat, and make sure that it keeps going and is successful following COVID and beyond.
Thank you. Brett Rose?
I actually work for a small family-owned business, so this comes really close to my heart. In the past 3 to 6 months that we've had this problem, I've had to lay off half my staff. The problem we have is there's not enough incentive to get the people to go back out to reshop the small businesses, to help the small businesses to grow, and to get the people that they need back.
Thank you. Alice Hausman.
Every level of government needs to be involved in this particular issue. We saw it happen first in Washington with the passage of the CARES Act, and we saw what can go wrong if you aren't careful in terms of how you write that bill and how you distribute those dollars. And dollars can quickly be squandered going to the wrong people and not doing what, in this case, was the hope, and that is that we would keep these small businesses afloat, alive. The state obviously has a big role, particularly through the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and there too we've partnered at the legislature. There were some early funding bills that thankfully in our legislature we were able to pass quickly to get some of the money out the door, but the problem is so big. And so Washington has to help, the state has to help, and we have seen the cities work. The city of St. Paul has looked for ways that they can very specifically reach out to small businesses in their city.
Thank you. Now we'll loop around to John Marty.
Thank you. In terms of the things we can do to help small businesses during the COVID crisis, the first thing to do is get a handle on the COVID crisis, which is why we're having masks, why we're trying to address this. I think it's been frustrating that the issue's been politicized and some people downplaying it, and that's made it worse and lasting longer, and we've got more deaths and more people afflicted with it than any other country, despite our very expensive system. And so I think we should work at that first. The federal government, clearly, as Alice and others have said, the federal government has a huge role to play. They are the ones who can step in and provide more money at a time when government has less funding because of the downturn in the economy. When there's a crisis, it needs to step in and help. The state has done some things. I think we could do more. I also think longer term, to help small businesses, we should take problems like health care coverage away from employer-based system, which has been very costly and very burdensome for small businesses and, frankly, large businesses as well.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Greg Copeland.
Yeah, I think really the facts are that there isn't enough money to provide subsidies to businesses that need what? Customers. You got to reopen the door and let business do business. If their cash registers aren't ringing, you know, folks, the state's not collecting the tax money. There is no magic fund to provide all these subsidies that some of the folks here tonight are talking about. The other thing that we have left out entirely in the discussion of this COVID crisis is what are we doing to reward the essential workers, the people that have gone to work and risked their own health, the people that have gone to work and risked the health of their families. I propose that we have a $10,000 non-refundable, that means you get a $10,000 tax credit up to that level on any liability you have for your income tax as an essential worker. We can target that. The state computers know exactly who's an essential worker. Why the governor's issued 6 months of executive orders telling us. So let's keep the money in the people's pocket this time and see that they have the opportunity to spend it at open businesses and let our economy recover. Thank you.
Thank you. The next responses for the next question will begin with Alice Hausman and go to the candidates left. Okay, homelessness has been a problem in our state, and the pandemic has only made it worse. What state action would you support that can help both property owners and renters?
Athena already mentioned the bonding bill, which we must get. And if we don't get the whole bonding bill, we better do the housing portion of it. Homes for All has asked for $100 million for general obligation bonding for public housing, and they initially asked for $400 million in housing infrastructure bonds. That's a new type of appropriation bond that we've started to use for housing. It enables us to partner with nonprofits, Lutheran Social Service, Catholic Charities, Common Bond Beacon, nonprofits doing amazing things. And for every dollar of state money, we leverage $3 of private money. So that partnership with the nonprofits and the state through the housing infrastructure bonds has been a really good tool. And hopefully we'll talk a little more later about the renters and eviction. I don't have the time in this answer, but the complexities of what happens with the eviction moratorium and that potential when the moratorium ends.
Thank you. Now to Brett Rose.
I've rented my apartment in Roseville now for almost 10 years. The problem that we have is in the past 10 years, there's been no new affordable housing in Roseville. We need to get more affordable housing in places like Roseville and other suburbs that need it. I mean, we've only had 110 units, I believe, in 10 years. It's just ridiculous. You walk down the city of St. Paul, you got the tents right there. We need to do more to incentivize the landlords to get the affordable housing built, the developers to get the affordable housing built, and to get these charities to help them and incentivize them to help get the people off the streets.
Thank you. Now to Athena Hollins.
I think we can all agree that all Minnesotans deserve a place to call home. And certainly during COVID-19, we have seen a remarkable, unprecedented spike in homelessness definitely in St. Paul. I would guess in the rest of the metro area as well. I know that this is a really complex issue, and that providing subsidies and rent forgiveness and mortgage forgiveness is not a long-term cure, but it is something that I think is immediately necessary. Housing and not having stable housing impacts every aspect of a family's life, from being able to get and secure employment to creating long-standing educational goals with children. So more than ever, we need to make sure that we are looking at this as an investment in our future and provide that rent forgiveness and mortgage forgiveness as soon as possible.
Thank you. Next response from Mikki Murray.
Our housing situation is not new, and as with many things, the pandemic has actually exacerbated what it is we've been seeing. Working with various nonprofits who have great solutions in providing options for people is actually not new either. Stronger allocation or more accountable allocation of federal funds absolutely is a requirement. What happened with the first round of subsidies coming from the federal government was unconscionable. And it's important. It is absolute requirement that we make sure every dollar goes to where it's supposed to go. As for housing, long-term incentives for developing low-income housing, that isn't new either. We just haven't been very good at it. Long-term reallocation of existing stock, absolutely a requirement, and that is something that the state and at every level we can do.
Thank you. And now to Greg Copeland.
Thank you. You know, Mikki Murray's right. We've done a lousy job of providing housing help, building new housing in St. Paul in particular. I can think of one development on Maryland that Habitat for Humanity has spent $11 million on to build what will be supposedly 11 new homes. $1 million a copy for a home in St. Paul, folks. We cannot solve the problem that way. We've got to do better. And frankly, we need to go back to work. People need jobs. And the other thing that we need is to eliminate the artificial barriers that the legislature has placed on the Housing Finance Agency. If you want to open up housing, it takes money. And there's plenty of people that, you know, like it or not, I'm not one of these anti-corporate types. You know, it's okay to take the public's money that wants to get tax credits to invest to build housing. And we should allow that to happen. So let's let the Housing Finance Agency do what it was created to do in the first place, and do it now. We can't wait.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, John Marty.
Yes, when I mentioned earlier the COVID crisis aggravated and exposed a lot of problems, housing is clearly one of them. People losing their jobs all of a sudden can't afford to pay their mortgages and so on, which is why the eviction moratorium and funding to help people is so essentially important. But it also shows how the fact that we have such a poor housing policy in the long run has made it worse, because we have people who are homeless and people in homeless shelters and people in overcrowded in the housing. That's where disease spreads. And with a situation like COVID, it's a serious problem. Since the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, when the federal government basically backed out of dealing with affordable housing, we've had a huge and continually growing housing problem because the states haven't had the resources to fill it in the gap. But that was something until then. We didn't have church basements filled with people who are homeless. We didn't have working people who are homeless. We didn't have kids in homeless shelters. But when the federal government backed away from it and the states didn't fill in the gap, we have to fill in the gap somehow or another now.
Thank you. Responses for the next question will begin with Greg Copeland and go to the candidates left again. The pandemic is impacting funding that might otherwise be available for environmental actions such as energy efficiency, clean transportation, and carbon emissions. Where should these fit into the upcoming legislative session?
We still encourage private sector investment and creation of new jobs. Obviously, there's a great future there. But we've got, some folks in Minnesota's legislature currently that oppose developing the resources that our God put in Minnesota. The mineral rights that are there to be exploited and used to build the batteries that we want to have for electric vehicles. You can't have electric vehicles without the batteries. And if you're against exploiting the minerals that are in Minnesota, you're against jobs. It's that simple. I don't want to hear about, oh, well, the water. You know what? The people up there protect their water. They have to drink their water, just like farmers in this state protect their water. And we would do a sight better protecting our own water in St. Paul if we do something about the lead that's in the 12,000 lines in this city that are not being addressed by the legislature. They have a study. They came up with that number. It's not mine. So let's get to work.
Thank you. Next response, John Marty.
I certainly agree energy efficiency and renewable energy has to be a key driver, a key focus next year, because regardless of the COVID crisis, regardless of the budget issues, we have to find a way to address it. Climate change is not something we can wait on. It is an existential threat to humanity. We have to address it. I'm not sure the concern about mining, I'd be happy to debate that issue or discuss that at some point, but the bottom line is we can and have been making progress, but we're doing it in tiny incremental steps at a time we need bold change. I believe we urgently have to take something like the Green New Deal to move forward, so we're going to fundamentally change the entire way our economy works in terms of energy, because we are one planet that we are facing a huge crisis and we have done far too little and the clock's ticking, so we got to move fast.
Thank you. Now we loop around to Alice Hausman.
Thank you. Climate change obviously has to be at the top of our priority list. We can do several challenges. We can work on the housing crisis and climate change. There's some good news on this particular in this particular area of energy policy changes, and that is the market is driving it. Xcel Energy has discovered that really wind and solar make economic sense. They are cheaper to do than some of our traditional fuels. And so we haven't even had to do a lot of forcing there. Xcel is in a major way investing in solar and wind. I think there's such a will on the part of the public. Here we're going to have a good partnership, I think, with people in the community. Children are learning about this, and so there's, I think, huge motivation and being led by by market forces in wind and solar, where it's not going to be a hard investment for utilities to make anymore because it's the smart thing to do.
Thank you. Next to Brett Rose.
The Green New Deal is something that we don't need. Wind and solar is also great to have, but we still need our fossil fuel that we'll always use. You need to make the batteries, that's going to take fossil fuels. You got to make the cars. It's all going to cause more greenhouses effect. We need to put the people to what they want. They want the fossil fuels, they want things, but we also need to find a way to help the climate change.
Thank you. Now to Athena Hollins.
We all need a safe, clean environment to live in. And I believe that it is my job to do everything within my power to make sure that that happens for the state of Minnesota. I don't think that climate change is a singular issue. I think it needs to be viewed as a multifaceted issue, and we need to inject it into every single piece of legislation that comes before us. I'm talking housing, transportation, education, commerce, everything, because this is the existential crisis of our day. And if we don't deal with it now, I'm not going to be able to face my children in 20 years and tell them I had the opportunity to change things and now they live in a waste zone. So I'm here to make a difference on climate change, and I believe that it needs to be done now.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Mikki Murray.
Clean energy without nuclear is a joke. None of the alternatives, wind, solar, any of our other clean sources, are nowhere near ready for the capacity that will be required should we, as we continue with downgrading coal-fired plants as we move away from fossil fuels. It's not possible. And there's plenty of evidence to show that. So for investments that are taking place now into things like solar and wind, they are highly subsidized. So that does not make it a viable option at this point. Yes, we need to keep working on it. Yes, there are plenty of opportunities for new jobs and new technologies, but without nuclear, we are not serious.
Thank you. Responses for the next question will begin with Athena Hollins and go to the candidate's right. What measures do you support to improve and secure elections and voting in our state?
That's a fantastic question. I think we can all agree that voting is a keystone of our democracy, and we have to do everything that we can to protect it. I am very heartened by the work that has been done currently, making sure that folks have the opportunity to vote from their homes, vote by mail securely, doing early voting. And I would like to see those things continue past the time of COVID, because these are opportunities. We've seen record voting turnout during a pandemic in the primary. And I believe that that is because of these opportunities that we have. If we want to make sure that every Minnesotan's voice is heard, we need to make it easy for them to do that. And the number one way to do that is to bring the voting to them.
Thank you. Brett Rose.
Absentee voting has been something we've had forever. We still need the people to be there to witness it. We still want people to do the signatures. You still need to make sure that it's fair and that you're not doing fraud. That's the main concern that we have with the mail-in voting. So as long as you have the witness, we can keep going.
Alice Hausman.
We've been served in the state very well by a long legacy of secretaries of state who have put us in a great place for our current time. Just a really sound system that has been set up. I understand our Secretary of State, Steve Simon, was on, I think, CNN in the last day or two, and in a 5-minute question and answer, so very clearly laid out what is required of us to assure that everyone gets safely to the polls this year. Mailed voting, early voting, no barriers to registration, a commitment on the part of everyone to say, in a country like ours, in the state of Minnesota, every eligible voter should have access to the polls without difficulty or barriers.
Thank you. John Marty.
The first thing we have to do is continue to expand what the Voting Rights Act and other things have tried to do since the founding of our nation, where we've tried to get more and more people to have the promise of commitment to vote. 100 years ago this year, women having the right to vote. Those are all things that our nation sort of promised at the beginning, but we still haven't obtained. When the Voting Rights Act was basically thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court several years ago, saying it wasn't needed anymore, they've been disenfranchising people very fast. And I think the issue is we have to recognize that for the handful of people nationwide who have committed voter fraud by pretending to be somebody else, we don't need photo ID. We don't need things that discourage a lot of seniors from voting. We don't need those barriers. And the other thing we have to do to make sure our electoral process is fair is we have to take the big money out of politics. The money that's driving the political system, the billions of dollars now being spent on campaigns. I think we need a fair, equal public funding system in our democracy so that money talks, not the powerful interest groups. So the voters talk, not the powerful interest groups.
And to Greg Copeland.
Yes, and this one's great, because when I filed for this office, I also got a application for an absentee ballot and completed it, and was fortunate enough to have it all work just fine. And I voted in the primary absentee, and as a Republican, I'm telling you, I've been voting this way for a long time, absentee. I don't see a problem. I think the president's failed to distinguish between mailing ballots to everybody that's ever been on a voter roll. We don't want that. But certainly, if a voter doesn't want to wait in those lines, they have a way to avoid that by simply getting the information mailed to them. The other thing I have to say after listening to the last response, getting the money out of politics, we have public financing in Minnesota. Let me tell you about how it works. If I raise $3,000 as a Republican, I get $5,700 from the state. Isn't that wonderful? When my opponent raises $3,000, he gets $14,500, 5 times what I get from the state. You know, that sounds a little unfair. So I'm a little tired of hearing about how we're going to have fair elections.
Thank you. Final response on this question, Mikki Murray.
Thank you. Minnesota has one of the longest early voting time frames in the nation, which is about 7 weeks. There is opportunity for all those who wish to receive a ballot to request one and receive it at their address. Voting is a privilege, it is also a responsibility. I believe it is incredibly irresponsible to blanket send out ballots without validating who is there to receive it. I believe the current method of our absentee voting ensures that the person who's requesting the ballot is the one that it's sent to. I am very much in favor of training our youth about the responsibility and the privilege that voting provides. And it is not something that we should blanket make available to just anyone. I do believe that citizenship has its privileges, and I believe voting is one of them. Thank you.
I have a 30-second rebuttal because I was mentioned in the last response from my opponent.
I didn't mention the gentleman's name.
I understand, but it was pretty clear who
So you agree that you're getting $14,500? Well, I get $5,700, and that's supposed to be fair, and you want to get the big money out of politics, John?
Excuse me, we do have a provision for a 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. And my rebuttal is I've been fighting for years to have a fair public finance system that pays for the cost of elections and is equal to people of both parties. That's equal across the board. It's equal across districts around the state. I've been fighting that for years. I wish I had more people fighting for it instead of attacking it, saying that it's not the way it should be right now, because I've been trying to change that.
You've had 34 years, John.
Okay, we have about half a question's worth of time left. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds each on this next one, okay, for the timers. So this is just a quick response. So I didn't tell you who we're starting. We're starting with Brett Rose. 30 seconds, yeah, just the half. Start with Brett Rose and go to the candidates left. Okay, what is your top priority for infrastructure?
Top priority for infrastructure is we need to get the roads fixed. We need to have things so people still get their transportation. Public transportation is nice to have, but people still need their cars. People need to go the far away. They need to travel. And that's how we keep the businesses going, by having things like that. We get the construction workers out there. We get the roads fixed, the bridges fixed. We can work on public transit. It's great to have. My wife works for Metro Transit for 20 years, but we need to do the roads for people.
Thank you. Now to Athena Hollins.
My top priority would be public transportation, making it more accessible, better run, more affordable for the individuals who need it, and hopefully connecting some major thoroughfares throughout the state of Minnesota and increasing its presence in greater Minnesota.
Thank you. Mikki Murray.
My priority for infrastructure is actually broadband access. With the impact of COVID-19, we know that there are a lot of people who will end up being remote in one way or another, whether it's for school, whether it's for work, and we need that infrastructure in place to support the creation of new business, to support those efforts, remote efforts, and it needs to be fair and equitable in pricing and investment throughout the state.
Thank you. Greg Copeland.
Yeah, I'm an active bus rider in St. Paul, and frankly, we need a lot of work on our bus system. It is so inefficient. You can't get a bus from my neighborhood, Payne Avenue, right, directly across to Rice Street. You got to go downtown, ride up on 2 or 3 different little buses after you get to get these connections. You know, folks, they want to build in Maplewood on the Vento Trail what will be ultimately $1 billion bus road to White Bear Lake. We've already got a bus road to White Bear Lake. It's on 35. So let's not duplicate the stuff that we've already got. You know those min pass lanes, folks? How many millions did we spend on that?
Thank you. John Marty?
Unfortunately, there are way more priorities than I think we're going to have in a bonding bill this year, but I certainly agree with some of the previous comments like public transportation and broadband access, but the one I would pick first and foremost would be housing. I think the need is so urgent, and there's so many roles where we have public housing. The backlog just of repairs in public housing in St. Paul and Minneapolis is probably close to $500 million. We have a lot of work to do, so housing's number one for me.
Thank you. And the final response from Alice.
And I'll echo his. Housing right now, because of the crisis, nothing else in life goes well if you don't have a safe place to sleep at night. So it's sort of the basic security you need before you can work on everything else. Not that higher education and public transit and all of those other things are not equally vital in the lives of people, but the immediate crisis for me is that one.
Thank you. Well, I hate to say it, but that concludes our question and answer portion of tonight's forum. We have barely skimmed the surface of the many, many important topics that will be facing the legislature this year. So I hope you've gotten some good answers. And if you haven't heard your point of particular interest addressed, please contact the candidates. And we'll now move to their closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement, done in reverse order from the openings, which means we start with Alice Hausman.
Thank you, and a very, very significant thank you to the League of Women Voters for a long history of doing this work. That in an election, you know the importance of having informed voters, and you have played the most significant role in organizing in every community. And we are very grateful to you for that. Because for a citizen, that is our first obligation. If we're going to vote, we'd better be informed voters. And that isn't easy, to find sources of information that are clear and honest and that you can depend on. And then second, after you are informed, to get to the polls. We've talked about absentee ballots and mailed voting or going to the polls. This year, my advice to voters, though, is if you're thinking about the election judges, the more you can vote by mail rather than filling the polls, the better for all of those election judges who have to be there working that day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next will be John Marty.
Thank you, and again, thanks to the League for hosting this. As has been mentioned, there are very few ways the public has to finding out where their candidates stand, and I think that is essential in a democracy. Wish we had more time to get into issues like public safety that we haven't really talked about, and gun violence in this country, which is an epidemic. Wish we had more time to talk about health care. I believe that we can provide health care to everyone at a far lower cost than we're doing now. But these are issues we have to address. I've been frustrated for many years about the slow pace of change at the Capitol, how many people would prefer to tinker with problems rather than take bold responses, and continue to push and push. And I actually think in this last year or two, there's much more growing public anger and outrage in saying it's time for bold change. So I'm hopeful next year will be a year for bold change. I urge you to take a look at my website, johnmarty.org, to find out more information, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. The next closing statement is from Mikki Murray.
I thank the League of Women Voters for hosting us tonight, as well as SPNN, and I thank all of you who are watching us live and those who will watch the recording later. Thank you for taking the time to be informed. We are in a time of great change, great chaos, great anger, and from there will actually come great changes. We must be very serious about taking advantage of the opportunity to advance the discussion, to advance the thought process in order to actually bring change to pass. The time will come when a lot of this will subside, and unfortunately, it will be too late then to actually make great changes. So we do need to have sober-minded people to take advantage of that opportunity and to work through the noise that is taking place now, the things that are causing distraction. I look forward to your questions. I ask for your support and your vote come November. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Next closing statement from Greg Copeland.
And I'd like to thank the League as well. Without you, there'd be silence on these issues tonight and people be watching that football game. I hope we can do this again. Mr. Marty indicated he'd be happy to debate mining anytime. I certainly am willing. Anytime you want, John. You can pick the forum and the place, call the rules. Let's have an open debate about jobs in St. Paul. Because you know what? That's where we live, the people sitting in this room. That's where you voters who are going to elect us to office live. We have twice the poverty in St. Paul as we do in the state at large. Poverty didn't start with COVID. Poverty's been here a long time. Are we interested? Are we committed? Will we take action? Or are we going to have more years and decades of seances, meetings, reports, and the rest? You know, all of these problems need one thing to happen, and that's this economy to reopen. And my opponent has a chance to go down to the Capitol tomorrow and vote with the sane people that want to reopen this thing and repeal the governor's order. And let's get Minnesota back to work.
Thank you. Next closing statement from Athena Hollins.
Thank you. This is a pivotal moment in our history, and we need really bold systemic changes. I know it feels like it's too much to take on sometimes, but I want to tell you a little story, which is when COVID first hit, I paired together with a district council, with a church, with the Salvation Army, and with a ton of volunteers to distribute food to people who were locked out of grocery stores, who had lost their jobs, who were otherwise unable to feed themselves and their families. And we served over 1,500 people every day. I want to tell you this because it inspires me. It means that we can pull together even during trying times and make something beautiful. We can weather the storm that we are living through right now and come out the other side with bold changes that will be better for every Minnesotan out there. I ask for your support on November 3rd, and if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me at my website. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the final closing statement from Brett Rose.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, as well as for you for taking your time out to watch us tonight. A lot of things have been said about change. A lot of people saying they're going to change this, they're going to change that. But people who are talking about change have been there for 30 years. Where's the change? I mean, you've been there time, you're still having the same problems. Things aren't changing. Our education, $11,000 per child, per public education. Are they getting the best they can? That needs to change. The systemic needs to change. We need to get a real change and real progress in the state.
Thank you. And now I get to make my closing statement. I'd like to thank all of the candidates for joining us here at the SPNN studio with their masks and all of their ideas and hopes and dreams for the state. And I'd like to thank the viewing audience tonight and whenever you view it, because it will be repeated on SPNN's several platforms and through the League of Women Voters St. Paul and Roseville area websites. There'll be links available to see it. So recommend it to other people. I'd like to encourage everyone, of course, to vote. And if you are uncertain about whether you're registered or how to get a ballot, go to MN Votes. The Secretary of State's website has online voter registration, online applications for absentee ballots. It can tell you where to go, where your polling place is, if you want to vote in person. All of the information is there. And since the program is available on a number of platforms, I will remind you that recordings of this event, whether they be in person or from a computer screen, may not be used without the expressed written approval of the League. And we only allow it to be used in its entirety except by regular media. So with that, I thank everyone for being here and participating, and I wish you all to stay healthy.